Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I'm sharing how I made this cute punny card using some of the recently released Lawn Fawn supplies. The stamp set is called Simply Celebrate Critters and there's a big Happy Dad's Day sentiment die. The major design for this card actually follows closely from one that was posted as part of Lawn Fawn's release week for this release, so you can definitely check out their blog to see the card that inspired this one, but I had a lot of fun kind of making my own as well. So without further ado, let's get into the card making. I'm starting with the background, which I wanted to look like a cloudy sky. This is a technique that a lot of crafters used. I've used it many times. You've probably seen it before. But essentially what I've done is taken a piece of nice blending cardstock, cut it down to just slightly smaller than a card front. So I believe this is 3 3/4 by 5 inches. Just using a die, you can see that nice stitching detail around the edge. Then I'm just taking some tumbled glass Distress Oxide ink with my foam blending applicator. And I'm just blending on some of that ink all the way up the card using a cloud stencil. And this is a cloud stencil by My Favorite Things, but Lawn Fawn makes one. Lots of companies have these where it's like a different cloudy edge on each side. So all you have to do is rotate it as you move up and then add a little bit more blue ink, rotate it, move it up, add a little bit more blue ink, and just keep going, and eventually you fill in the whole sky with these really cute clouds. Now I'm going on to make this sort of brick wall, and I wanted it to look like these dogs were sitting on top of a brick wall. So I have a few pieces of that same blending cardstock here. I won't actually end up using them all. I wasn't sure how much I would need. So I'm just starting by blending onto this main rectangle here, which I actually cut with that same die so it'll match that stitching edge from my background piece. I just cut it, of course, to be a little bit smaller. Then I'm taking 2 different colors of Distress Oxide inks. One is brown, I'm using Vintage Photo, and the other is red. I'm using Fired Brick, which of course is so aptly named I had to use it for the brick wall. And I'm just sort of blending them onto this cardstock piece in blotches and trying to blend them together to make them overlap the colors a little bit, but you don't have to worry about it too much. Pretty much looks like a hot mess at this stage, but you'll see how it kind of comes together when we add some stenciling. I also have this stitched edge piece, which is actually a piece that comes from a different die set. It's for a picket fence by Lawn Fawn. I'll have the name of the die set down in the description below if you want to check it out. It essentially just creates this small, thin rectangle piece that has like a stitched detail down the middle. So I thought this would be really nice for sort of like the topper of the wall. And I did the same thing where I sort of just blended on that brown and red ink just in splotches onto that as well. So now I'm taking my brick stencil and I'm using the same colors, and I'm just going over that blending using the stencil with the same colors that I had used initially. So again, that's Fired Brick and Vintage Photo. I'm just sort of trying to keep them into the same spots, but if you go over or like go outside of the lines a little bit, it really doesn't matter because those colors blend together really well. So you'll just actually get better blending if you kind of go over the lines a little bit with the colors. So just continuing to try to blend them together and using those same colors over top of the stencil. And when I pull the stencil back, you'll see how this sort of helps make the overall pattern look better. You don't get that sort of hot mess splotchiness anymore. The bricks sort of tie everything together, so it just sort of looks like a multicolored wall. So I'm doing the same thing on that little topper piece. Just took my brick stencil and aligned it so that the brick pattern will show through. And then I'm just taking those 2 colors, blending through the stencil over top of the areas that I had already blended. And then when I pull the stencil back, it's a little bit harder to see because this piece is so tiny, but you do get those little brick patterns on that piece as well. Okay, so now that those background pieces are mainly done, I'm moving on to the stamped images. I stamped out these 2 images from the Simply Celebrate Critter stamp set. So one is that line of cute dogs, and the other one was the empty speech bubbles. And to fill in the speech bubbles, I used a separate stamp set that was also released by Lawn Fawn. I think it's called Dad Jokes, but I'll have, again, all the supplies listed down below. So check down there for the proper names of everything I'm using. So I used just a variety of sentiments from that stamp set to fill in the speech bubbles with a cute joke. So it says, "Why did the bike fall over? Crickets. It was too tired. Haha, snort." There's a few different jokes you can use from that stamp set, and they're all pretty cute, so I just picked that one as my favorite for this. And then I'm just taking my Copic markers and coloring in these dogs. And the fun thing about these stamps is that you've got like a set of 5 dogs. There's another one that has a set of 5 cats and like a whole bunch of other different animals. And you can kind of color them all in differently. So for the first dog, I just used some sort of reddish brown tones. For the second dog, I used some lighter browns. Now for this third dog, I'm using some warm grays. And I'm going to continue along the pattern of dogs, just coloring them in differently. And you can always look for inspiration on how to color animals online. There's so many other cute ways to do it. Or you can think to your real pets or pets that you know in real life. I know my dog is a golden retriever, so I always try to have at least one dog that sort of looks like her. None of them in this stamp set really did fit the bill. None of them are like quite the right shape or floofy enough, but I did try to color that second one at least like sort of a goldeny brown color, just in homage to her. For this fourth dog, I'm just using some light browns in combination with a dark brown on its little snout. It's so fun to kind of just think of different patterns for these little dogs and have them all look different. And then with each of them, just adding in some shading using a bit of a darker tone in the areas where I think there should be shadow, and then blending it out with the light color. I always love adding little pink cheeks as well with a pink Copic marker. I always think that's really cute, and then filling in the ears with pink as well. For the last dog, I'm just using some cool gray markers, just again to add a little bit of variation to these dogs and just kind of coloring him in, starting with the darkest shade and then blending out to the lightest. Just putting that darker shade down where I think there should be the most shadow and moving on to the lightest shades where I think the light would be hitting. I often like to come back in with a darker shade just to add some extra dimension, so I'm doing that here. And then finally, these little doggies are done. So I went ahead and cut out those two images, and now I can finally put the card together. I cut out this die, or this sentiment using a die. This is the, I think, Giant Happy Dad's Day die by Lawn Fawn. I cut that out of some yellow cardstock just to have it stick out, and then I'm cutting apart the words. And this is something that I learned from that video that Lawn Fawn released during their release week. There was another card as part of that where they did this as well. So they cut apart the die and then they kind of stuck the images in between them. So you have the top half of the sentiment on the top of the card and then the bottom of the sentiment at the bottom, and the critters kind of in the middle, which I thought was a really nice design. So I just cut down that brick piece so it was the right height, stuck it on my cloud piece, and then I can add this topper, which just adds a really nice sort of finishing detail. Then I can take that letter, that set of letters that goes at the bottom, says day, and stick it right down using some liquid glue. And then I can take the rest of the sentiment that should go at the top, and again, just use some liquid glue to stick that down right at the top of the scene. This whole panel will be backed onto a card that has sort of like a pattern paper mat behind it, so it's okay if the letters are kind of going off the edge a little bit, there's still more card. For these images, these colored images, I just added some foam squares to the back of them so they stick up a little bit just to give them a little bit of extra detail. And then I can use my tweezers to make sure they're properly aligned and stick them down on the card. For these dogs, I'm just sticking them right onto the top of that brick wall so it looks like they're overhanging the brick wall. And then I can take that release paper off of those speech bubbles, and again I'll just use my tweezers to properly align those right under the word dads and have those be just above the dogs so it looks like the dogs are saying the jokes. It's good with these images, you can kind of use them to cover up any of those rough edges from cutting that sentiment apart, so it's all completely hidden. Now there was some space in between the speech bubbles and the dogs, and it was kind of bugging me. I kind of wished I had squished everything together a little bit more, but obviously it was a little bit too late for that. So to fill in that space, I'm just heat embossing an extra sentiment onto a strip of vellum. So I just coated that with my heat embossing powder tool, then I stamped that sentiment with some Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink for heat embossing. Then I could coat the whole thing with some white embossing powder, and then heat set it with my heat tool. And you'll see that creates that really nice white sentiment that says, "Dad, you make me laugh." So I thought that was a really nice little addition to the overall card here. Now, I cut that down into a thin strip that will fit in that space, and I can add it to the card. And the best way that I like to add vellum strips to cards is just to add a little bit of double-sided tape to either end and then fold it over the edge of the panel. And that way the tape or the adhesive is actually stuck to the back of the panel and you don't even see it on the final card. Vellum's a bit tricky because of course it's see-through or like a little bit translucent, so you don't want to add too much adhesive behind it on the front because then you'll see through the vellum and you'll see through the adhesive and it looks a little bit messy, unless you can like strategically hide the adhesive behind the words or the images, which I do often as well. But if you can't, this is another good way to do it. So I just took the first side, folded it over, stuck it down, and now I'm just making sure it's nice and straight, and then I can fold over the second side and stick it down as well, and then the strip is stuck onto the panel, but from the back. Okay, as the final touch, I'm just gluing this whole panel down onto a piece of pattern paper. Like I mentioned, this is sort of like a mat for the whole panel. And that's the size of a standard size card base. So then I can just put glue behind that and stick it all the way down onto a standard size card. And again, that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I used some pattern paper also from the latest Lawn Fawn release for the background there. It's that really pretty green stripe. So that's it. That's the card for today. I hope you enjoyed. I'm going to have a lot of fun giving this to my dad, and I think that he'll enjoy it with the cute little jokes, and I just love those little dogs. I'm sure I'm going to be using these images on a lot of other cards too. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you want to see more of my cards, make sure to head over to my Instagram profile, which is linked down in the description below. If you want to see the supplies I used, also check down in that description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!